What happens when a flag raises more than just eyebrows in a neighborhood ruled by a tyrannical HOA? Sometimes rebellion transforms into unexpected camaraderie and a celebration of freedom. Hey there, Porch Patrol Squad. Let me know if you've ever locked horns with a Karen like in today's story. Smash that like button and spill the tea in the comments. And if you're craving more outrageous HOA battles, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Believe me, you don't want to miss how this unfolds. I raised my glass high above my head, feeling a rush of adrenaline as the echo of community camaraderie filled the air. To the future of community spirit, I declared, my voice ringing out with boisterous glee. The crowd cheered, and old neighbors grabbed glasses filled with lemonade, iced tea, and perhaps even a dash of adult beverages and coffee mugs, because why not? Laughter restored a sense of unity that the HOA's hyper-detailed guidelines had sought to dismantle, like a poorly constructed sandcastle. I could see Carolyn's living room light flickering with agitation, a beacon of her bitterness that only fueled my resolve. What will she do now? I thought, a smirk stretching across my face. Would she emerge, ready to dampen our spirits with a litany of neighborhood regulations? The thought of yet another educational speech about the evils of celebration invigorated me like coffee on a Monday morning. As the laughter and jubilance continued to rise, I noticed a small procession of children dragging an oversized cardboard tank they had spray painted in glittery gold and army green. It squeaked along the grass as if in battle, and I chuckled at how they had truly embraced the chaotic whimsy of our Military Appreciation Day. Even more heartwarming was the sight of Mark refusing to sit down, striking a pose in front of the make-believe tank while narrating a heroic story about how this esteemed vehicle had fended off Carolyn's imaginary army of dourness. With each imaginative twist of the tale, the crowd erupted into cheers, all of us united in the absurdity of our rebellion. I momentarily lost myself in the joy of it all, soaking in the smells of burgers sizzling on the grill, the sounds of children playing, and the exhilarating feeling of contempt for any oppressive figure. Surely Carolyn must have been boiling over in her fortress, unable to comprehend how quickly we transformed her rules from chains into mere confetti. "Hey, Jordan," Mark called out, waving me over as he poured another round of drinks. "Where do you want to position the giant inflatable unicorn?" He laughed, earning himself a chorus of snickers. What an excellent question. The unicorn was just absurd enough to represent the ludicrousness of Carolyn's hold on our lives, and I could almost envision it standing at attention like a proud soldier in defiance of her disdain. "Let's put it right in her line of sight," I suggested mischievously, wanting the whimsical creature's horn to glow ever so brightly in her view, like a beacon of joy just begging for her criticism. As we wrestled to place the inflatable just right, I couldn't help but imagine Carolyn throwing her arms up at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. "Is this what you call community service?" I could totally hear her squealing in disbelief, and it was enough to send us both into a fit of laughter. With the unicorn defiantly positioned, the smell of burgers wafting through the air, and a wave of laughter rolling through the gathering, I could feel the weight of my predicament begin to lift. Sure, Carolyn and her 90-0 fine still loomed in the background like a storm cloud, but the thunder of community spirit was dousing it with a refreshing rain of fun. We shifted gears to prepare for the ultimate display of defiance, a parade, a march of solidarity laden with ridiculous floats powered not by machines, but by the sheer will of the neighbors who knew we could no longer stand for the oppression of laughter. The kids decided they would be the fearless crew of the cardboard tank, their helmets made from aluminum foil gleaming in the dim market of sunset. This was our opportunity. All of our creative strides would come to culminate in touting our joy for the world, especially for Carolyn standing on her porch, mouth agape in disbelief. Striding to the center of the lawn, I attempted to rally my troops once again. "Listen up!" I boomed over the din, and miraculously the crowd quieted down. Tomorrow, the tackiest, most ridiculous parade is setting off from my house. We'll showcase our beautiful rebellion against outdated norms, with a fabulous procession out into the neighborhood. My neighbors erupted into applause, many already stepping into leadership roles, assigning themselves various tasks. One would bring balloons in the form of army helmets. Another offered to bake cupcakes shaped like grenades. Everyone wanted in, and the enthusiasm radiated through the yard. The anticipation for the next day's events soared, and I couldn't help but feel like the protagonist of a comedy sketch, ready to drop the punchline with delightful accuracy. Carolyn wouldn't know what hit her. As twilight fell, illuminating our joyful gathering with a soft glow, I could hardly contain my excitement about what we had built together. This was fast evolving into a full-on rebellion against the mundane drudgery that Carolyn attempted to enforce. I could almost picture her face as she witnessed a parade of inflatable unicorns, tanks made of cardboard, and children dressed as exemplary soldiers marching proudly with a simple mission: to reclaim our community spirit. Would she finally confront us? Would she bring out cease and desist letters? Or would she perhaps observe our merriment from behind the curtain, unable to halt the avalanche of joyous defiance? The uncertainty only fueled the fire of my anticipation. Yet, just as the last rays of light disappeared behind the horizon, I felt invigorated, knowing that tomorrow would be a day of both laughter and victory. What if Carolyn shows up wearing a military hat, ready to face the music? Morning came with a burst of energy that only the promise of spirited mischief could muster. As I sipped my coffee, I looked outside at the giddy lineup of my neighbors readying for the parade. Balloons shaped like grenade cupcakes adorned my lawn like a carnival gone delightfully rogue, and a cluster of kids donned their cardboard helmets while brandishing pool noodle swords. Today, I thought, is the day we unleash unadulterated chaos to celebrate our community. I shared my enthusiasm with Mark, who had taken it upon himself to transform his truck into the troop transport, complete with a pop-up banner reading, "Battle for Freedom and Cupcakes." He gestured dramatically, providing sound effects as he narrated our soon-to-be legendary adventure. I felt like a general directing a quirky battalion, and every ounce of my ammunition was crammed with laughter. The moment arrived when our little band of misfits formed a line at the edge of my yard, poised for glory. I stood at the front, basking in the absurdity of our creation. A parade with no formality, no real direction, just a chaotic march through our otherwise reserved neighborhood. The kids piled into the cardboard tank, and with every squeaky wheel we set forth, confident that Carolyn Granger was still perched on her throne of springtime woes. The route was set to skewer straight down her street, a bold and calculated move to confront the villain with our jubilant absurdity. The first few houses clapped along, neighbors peeking out from behind open curtains in awe as if a comet had landed on their block. A sense of pride welled in me. Perhaps rebellion truly was a collective journey after all. As we passed the Granger's property, I could feel my heart rate spike, both in excitement and trepidation. Would Carolyn burst from her door like a caffeinated jack-in-the-box? It was then that I spotted movement in the shadows. Her silhouette emerged on the porch, arms crossed over a business-casual sweater that seemed to constrict her very soul. This was it. Cheers erupted from our side, as if we were fans cheering for a last-second playoff touchdown. The inflatable unicorn, standing at attention like an eccentric platoon member, gleamed under the sun, mismatched, yet proud. It was a sight to behold. A cacophony of laughter and nonsense filled the air as people marched past her, holding onto this ridiculousness like a badge of honor. Even the pets joined in the frolic, dogs barking along while trying to figure out if the giant cardboard tank was just a new breed of dog. To my utter joy, Carolyn's composure cracked just slightly. I watched with glee as her tight-lipped expression faltered when a loud balloon popped amidst our antics, sending a ripple of mock horror through our ranks. "See? This is the children's idea of community service," I shouted, in a playful mockery of her usual tone. I reveled in this moment where my words echoed through the air, combining defiance with pure silliness. She opened her mouth, the horrified reaction swelling like a balloon, ready to burst, but then, nothing. Instead, our neighbors pushed forward, chanting cries like "freedom," coupled with fits of laughter erupting in fits around her. Perhaps she was as rigid as a cardboard soldier glued in place, unable to escape her own propriety. With her stoic facade cracking further, I dared hope more than just a sliver of possibility. Our heroes of laughter surged ahead. The parade became a unified force of absurdity and joy, climaxing at the foot of Carolyn's stoop. I was momentarily swept away by the confluence of creativity and community, and I seized the moment to deliver my pièce de résistance, the unveiling of our military museum ambitions. Ladies and gentlemen, I began theatrically, holding aloft the historical exemption document I had discovered previously, adorned with haphazardly printed emojis to emphasize its unshakable legitimacy. In this moment vastly embraced by joy and merit, I declare our service flag, our courage shall stand tall. The children shouted in unison, their cardboard helmets and makeshift weapons clattering against one another with glee, and Carolyn's face contorted into a delightful mix of disbelief and impotent fury. I could hardly contain my laughter, watching her struggle internally like a character from a tragic comedy, trying to navigate the unfamiliar terrain of rebellion against unwarranted authority. The collective unmasking of her power felt intoxicating, and I reveled in the crescendo of applause from my comrades. Seniors from down the road, who had joined us with enthusiastic whoops, chimed in, dragging along a patrolling lawn chair like a military cargo collecting complications to our merriment. Had Carolyn finally met her match? The parade concluded with the grand finale, a champagne toast made from sparkling grape juice, all directed towards her stoop. With standing ovations echoing through the asphalt street, Carolyn attempted to hold her ground, feigning indifference. But I saw it, just a glimmer, a transformation of her rigidity uncoiling ever so slightly. In her epic battle of control against a horde of jubilant rebels, it seemed an underlying surrender would soon bloom. Maybe our raucous display had pricked at her heart, however buried it had been under rules and regulations. As I deflated my inflatable unicorn at the end of the day, I felt triumphant, not only for our victory over Carolyn's petty fervor, but for emerging as a community more connected than any HOA letter could undermine. What an exhilarating day! Who knew being neighbors would become a record of such glory? In that moment, I realized I'd not only turned my house into a military museum, but had also staged a wonderful revolution that would be talked about for years to come. As I stood there, my army flag snapping proudly in the wind, like a double middle finger to Carolyn Granger's reign of terror, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Who knew that a piece of fabric symbolizing my service to the nation could earn me a 90-0 fine? Carolyn approached like a storm cloud, wrapped in a sensible blazer, her tightly coiffed hair doing nothing to hide the wrath emanating from her perpetually pursed lips. "This isn't your army anymore, Miles," she barked. "Your flag is an unapproved sign. Your neighbors deserve peace and quiet." I nearly spat my coffee in disbelief. Peace? In a neighborhood where the most riveting activity was counting how many leaf blowers the Johnsons owned. After Carolyn's little power trip, I retreated indoors, my mind racing. How was I going to fight this? I could feel my blood starting to simmer as I paced around my living room. I had just finished my morning coffee, a very sacred ritual, mind you, and now I was staring down a fine larger than some people's mortgages. That's when it hit me. A light bulb so bright it could have powered the entire block. What if I turned my house into a shrine, a veritable museum of military excellence? The irony was too delicious to resist. My cottage wouldn't be just a home, it would be a beacon of service, standing proudly against the whims of tyrannical HOAs. The next day, armed with a refurbished budget and an explosion of creativity, I began my mission. I started with a hefty selection of historical military memorabilia collected from thrift stores and local VFW donations. Enlistment posters, military gear from different eras, and even an old military trunk appeared in my living room, soon evolving into a full-blown gallery. Mark, my easygoing neighbor and resident history buff, dropped by to offer his assistance. "It's like a battlefield in here," he chuckled, while watching me unearth framed portraits of stern-looking generals. Each one went up on a wall, saluting the pompous Karen from every angle. With every artifact hung, my project morphed from whimsical to something that really could rival the exhibit at the local museum. I carefully curated each section, making sure to label the displays with informative descriptions, all in an effort to educate the unsuspecting and potentially hostile neighbors. Welcome to the Jordan Miles Museum of Awesomeness and Valor. I imagined shouting at the residents during an open house event. I could see Carolyn's expression now, a mix of confusion and pure rage, like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. The thought made me chuckle as I envisioned her having a meltdown over mandatory neighborhood meeting protocols violated by my military extravaganza. Then came the pièce de résistance. I decided to stage a flag-raising ceremony. To make sure it wasn't just any old flag-raising, I invited fellow veterans, all clad in their military jackets, complete with medals glistening in the afternoon sun. The plan was simple. Draw the eyes and ears of every resident in our sleepy neighborhood and serve them an audible reminder of the freedoms our service affords, stirring attention with the proud strains of the Star-Spangled Banner. The day of the ceremony, my backyard was strewn with folding chairs, and I could practically taste the pending chaos as our small military ensemble arrived. People would come expecting a neighborhood barbecue and leave in horror. As the first notes of the anthem pierced the air, I watched as Carolyn emerged from her fortress of solitude, her eyes wide with disbelief. She took one look at the flags, and then at the multitude of people in attendance, and turned the color of overripe tomatoes. I could feel the thrill of my tiny rebellion reach a fever pitch, the very atmosphere thick with escalating tension. Mark nudged me with a grin. I think we've officially crossed into absurdity territory. I couldn't agree more. As I surveyed the gathering crowd, the expressions of bewilderment on their faces were priceless. Surely Carolyn would have a heart attack. Moments later, as I raised my flag with painstaking ceremony, I couldn't help but throw a cheeky salute in Carolyn's direction, channeling my best military composure amid the ridiculousness. Her irritation boiled over, resulting in a futile attempt to reclaim power over her neighborhood, only for the crowd to laugh and hoot at the absurdity of her unsanctioned authority. The local news arrived to cover the spectacle, the camera crew capturing Carolyn's impotent fury while they filmed my patriotic celebration. Maybe she could issue fines, but there was no denying I had transformed my small act of defiance into a community spectacle. What would Carolyn do next? I couldn't wait to find out. As the curtain of evening fell, basking my backyard in golden hues, the aftermath of my military museum debut was still lingering thick in the air. Attendees were milling about, some with cups of lemonade, others hilariously trying to bargain for one of my military-themed cookies, astonishingly dubbed Bravo Bites. With a wild mix of patriotism and absurdity still buzzing in the atmosphere, Mark elbowed me and said, "Who knew that homemade cookies could be so informative?" He held up a sign that read, "Historical Cookie Facts," in doodled lettering. I chuckled because, in Carolyn's world, I was pretty sure that was a violation of some obscure food policy she had made up in the recesses of her mind. What an ironic twist of fate. My tribute to service had turned into a neighborhood gathering where celebration overtook strict guidelines. The crowd began shedding their initial reluctance as they interacted, swapping military-themed anecdotes over snacks. By now, even the diehard Karen loyalists were tentatively nodding at the absurdity, some even peeking curiously at the decommissioned uniforms I had framed next to my prized collection of Army duffel bags. I could see the same sense of community my Army brothers and sisters had always espoused. "I never knew you had all this hidden talent, Jordan," chuckled Mrs. Glimmer, a sweet elderly neighbor who had always been terrorized by Carolyn's HOA-driven vigilantism. "I think it's time we broke the chains of conformity, don't you think?" I joked, raising a plastic cup of lemonade and mock toast, which only deepened her delight. Then, the most surreal moment came when the local news team rolled up just as I was demonstrating the hilarious side of military history, which undoubtedly brought my dry humor to the forefront. I held up a helmet, claiming it was the original model for gathering popularity. Mark nearly lost it when I said, "Now, if you find one that fits Carolyn, it's a miracle." The camera crew captured our laughter, and I knew my antics were only strengthening the community's spirit. As the anchorman conducted a lighthearted interview, Carolyn glared from her window, arms crossed with the intensity of a general about to unleash a lecture on insubordination. poor woman had no clue she was turning into a punchline for the ages. Not to be let off easily, Carolyn stormed out of her house, dressed in her blazer, looking all too much like she was attending some black tie gala instead of witnessing a battlefield-themed celebration in the middle of the suburban battleground. I held my breath as she approached, and the crowd hushed, a collective anticipation hanging in the air like the stillness before a thunderstorm. What would she do? How could she protest this? Everyone's eyes were glued to Carolyn as she opened her mouth to deliver what they all had been waiting for, a passionate condemnation. Instead, shockingly, she managed a few mumbled, incoherent words, failing miserably to reel us back in. It was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum. Everyone just stood there, silently mocking her failed authority. But Carolyn wasn't done. Oh no, the crackdown was imminent. "You are going to regret this, Jordan Miles. Do you know the fines I can impose?" she shouted, still unaware that her threats could hardly disturb our gathering. I caught my breath, clearly aware of how this was merely the prelude to a much grander act. "Oh, really, Carolyn? You mean all those 90 fines?" Because last I checked, this was my historical reenactment of peace, regardless of HOA bylaws. I shot back, pulling out my phone to take a selfie. Moments like these had to be documented. The look on Carolyn's face was pure gold. The crowd erupted in laughter, and I fought the urge to flex my own muscles in mock intimidation. As the night unfolded, the crowd shared their opinions on Carolyn's impending wrath, and I could almost see my backyard territory turning into a sanctuary for rebellious spirits. This was a rebellion against bureaucracy and lawn police. We were all comrades in arms now, united against the tyrannical reign of Madame HOA. In the spirit of military shenanigans, instead of packing it up, we circled the lawn for a spirited game of hot potato, using a mock grenade I had only half-heartedly purchased. The atmosphere burst with laughter, emboldened camaraderie, and clashing tactics against the establishment, and I couldn't help but feel victorious. Certainly, this was what service was about, the power of community to stand against silly authority. Later that evening, once everyone had dispersed and Caroline had backtracked to the shelter of her home, I plopped down on my favorite lawn chair and full-on belly laughed at how gloriously outrageous the day had turned out. Sure, Carolyn would undoubtedly retaliate through more paperwork and bureaucratic nonsense, but it didn't matter. I'd birthed an entire movement from my rebellious whim. As I settled into the post-event shock of delight, my phone buzzed with a text. "Next time, let's do this at a real military reenactment instead." That was Mark, ever the optimist. I could only respond, "Who needs a reenactment when our neighborhood's HOA is still living in the 1940s? The laugh carried me off to dreamland, leaving me wondering. The question now loomed large. What could I possibly plan next to upstage Carolyn's inherent need for control? The aftermath of my military-themed soiree had everyone buzzing like bees in a well-stocked honey jar. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a collective sense of community filled the air, leaving Carolyn's huff about fines and bylaws as little more than distant echoes. With each day, my backyard grew into a full-blown military museum. Sandbags transformed into makeshift benches, while model tanks lined my carefully curated paths made of mulch shaped like mini battlefields. I could hardly keep track of how many friends turned up just to add a personal touch, whether they were helping to paint the homemade "Welcome to the Frontline" sign or sharing pie recipes as if they were state secrets guarded by the highest military brass. My ordinary lawn had become the backdrop for something wonderfully absurd, a playground for the whimsical and a stronghold for the absurdly rebellious. As rumors spread like wildfires through the neighborhood faster than Carolyn's stern declarations, I found myself in a surreal new position. Neighborhood icon. The local kids lined up each weekend, begging for guided tours of my fascinating collection, and who could resist charging a small admission fee? For the record, I enforced a strict "no Carolyn" policy, limiting entry to those who weren't insistent on adhering to the infinite list of HOA rules. Meanwhile, my other neighbors rallied behind me like a jolly band of misfit soldiers, hosting impromptu barbecues and telling tales that both honored military bravery and skewered the absurdity of Carolyn's iron grip. I never thought I'd say thank you to a service flag, but clearly, it has brought us together in glorious rebellion, chuckled Mr. Jenkins, who half playfully eyed Carolyn's house. Every great hero needs a compelling sidekick, and nothing rekindled my spirit like Mark's relentless energy. He wandered over with his flannel shirt full of notes one afternoon, clutching a clipboard as if it contained plans for the next great military operation. "Jordan," he shouted, practically bouncing with glee. "We've got to organize a local charity event under the military museum, guys. Maybe we can call it Fortify Your Neighbor, where everyone brings a dish and a donation for our local veterans." I had to stop myself from hugging him, the sheer audacity of the idea bubbling up inside me like molten lava. I couldn't help but envision the headlines. "Local heroes unite against HOA tyranny." It had a magical ring to it, wouldn't you agree? Our planning session morphed into a strategy meeting that would put most real military operations to shame. We brainstormed everything from military bake-offs — I was willing to share my popular Bravo Bites recipe — to obstacle courses that paid tribute to boot camp training. Pictures of Carolyn covering her eyes in despair as kids ducked under barbed wire, crafted from hula hoops, were already dancing in my mind, each grin from the neighborhood leaking back to my inner soldier. Of course, as with every grand plan, the reality struck like an unexpected water balloon. I received a text from Carolyn just days before our event, an ominous missive that blared with bureaucratic authority, a cease and desist order threatening fines that could metaphorically require the sacrifice of several limbs in the name of community harmony. "Cease and desist, huh?" I mused, reading the message over and over as giggles erupted around me. Clearly, she's taking this as seriously as I am. With Mark by my side and a handful of other neighbors on speed dial, we turned Carolyn's ultimatum into an opportunity for a literal battle of wits. "What if we make our charity event a protest for community spirit?" I exclaimed. "Let's show Carolyn that all her rules can't crush our shared love for camaraderie and further." Mosaic. We all cheered, and I could see a handful of unexpected supporters, including some who'd never crossed to the dark side before. That moment provided the adrenaline burst I needed to kick our defenses into high gear. The event day arrived, and my backyard transformed into an exhilarating war zone of laughter, games, and all-around riotous joy. The Wi-Fi speaker played military themes, perfectly contrasting the summertime soundtrack of laughter and spirited competition. Families formed teams to tackle the obstacle course while wearing ridiculous military hats I'd haphazardly strewn across the yard. Anything from officers to confused-looking privates that would make retired individuals cringe. Spectators lined up to purchase my famous cookies, each one reinforced with enough tales of victory and valor to keep morale high. Carolyn, peering out from her fortress covered in shimmering armor of annoyance, might as well have been watching an invasion. Her face was a comedy of expressions: shock, anger, and a sprinkle of bewilderment as she saw the vastness of her town's support for my endeavors. I could almost feel the realization sinking in, like a boot slipping into quicksand. Would it come to a point where she'd need to rally her HOA troops against me? Oh, the irony! That very thought brought a smug smile to my face, as I watched my neighbors come together for a cause greater than any ridiculous battle over bylaws. With Carolyn's moral fumbling, orchestrated by her own misguided attempts to enforce rules, the riot of friendship and laughter proved stronger than any paperwork she could brandish. We lifted our glasses in a metaphorical toast to community, to the collective refusal to be confined by pettiness. What else did Carolyn really have to say? The barrier between my foes and me had never been clearer than the increasing distance from Carolyn's indignation to the joyful chaos overtaking my backyard. As the event flourished, it became apparent that the once solitary fight against HOA tyranny had blossomed into a full-fledged community rallying cry. Parents played tug-of-war with hilarious military lingo. Children darted between makeshift barricades of picnic blankets, and stacks of baked goods stood proud beside tubes of paint for anyone daring enough to attempt transforming their battle tanks into whimsical unicorns. Arts and crafts, mixed with kernel-popping contests, Friends and strangers were suddenly armed with spatulas instead of weapons, and I felt the camaraderie swell like a warm breeze blowing through the PVC pipe-clad cannon I had cleverly erected in a corner of the yard. I was charging full steam ahead into the vast unknown, all while Carolyn remained barricaded behind her terrifying walls of sternness, too miffed to embrace the bond everyone else shared. As activity buzzed around me, I began circulating with the gusto of a town crier, imploring parents to join in with ideas for a parade of hilarious homemade vehicles that would drive through the neighborhood in a demonstration of defiance against Carolyn's stark disapproval. "We need a general," I shouted, acting out over-the-top military gestures with enthusiasm rivaling that of a sold-out Broadway show. "So who's with me?" My followers erupted in laughter, and immediately plans materialized in excited whispers. "I can make a tank out of old tires. What if we decorated the cars with sparkly ribbon and fake army gear?" Suddenly, every one of us had embraced our inner creative genius, unwilling to let the oppressive HOA culture extinguish our playful spirit. It wasn't about the fines anymore. It was rage against the absurdity that had us playing dress-up in the first place. Across the yard, I caught sight of Carolyn's glowing disdain as she peered through the puritanical edges of her curtains. I imagined her spiral of frustration. There was her minion-esque collection of paperwork, subtly glitzy with yellow highlighters, while my neighborhood were the jubilant rebels, tossing confetti mouthfuls of fun into the face of her dictates. Rebellious excitement propelled me forward, and I found Mark warming up the crowd on my behalf. "What's a cease and desist order against community spirit?" he boldly asked. Any scattering of laughter echoed back to Carolyn with a pleasing vibrancy that made the boldness feel oddly genuine. My strategy was becoming clear. If I could rally the masses into celebrating community rather than fighting against rules, who could stand against that? Carolyn's fury fueled us further, galvanizing our joyous revolt into a mighty wave. As families reveled in each other's company, it became increasingly evident that Carolyn's grip on power was weakening. The tide was shifting, and suddenly I was less the hero in a lone battle, and more of a cartoon figure atop a glorious parade float. I dared to envision a voice echoing through Carolyn's domain again, that self-appointed bearer of household decorum, desperately trying to reclaim her dwindling authority. "It's time to cut the chatter," she would certainly yell in melodrama. "Have you forgotten about community guidelines, people?" The thought elicited gales of laughter, but behind each chuckle lay an understanding. We were crafting something more than just a day of hijinks. We were forging a community spirit that Carolyn, standing rigid and imperious on her hill, would find impossible to dismantle. As chaotic as it had been, I felt a strategic glee blossom within me, reminiscent of the morning broth bubbling in an expertly cast iron cauldron. We had only one obstacle left to conquer. The final showdown with Carolyn was yet to come. I took stock of the decor, contemplating how to evolve it further to demonstrate our united front, while remaining exhilaratingly childish. Somehow, I implored friends to venture into a fantastic creative realm, constructing grandiose prize markers that would cleverly poke fun at her interjections. Perhaps a bright rainbow inflatable, adorned with "You can't stop the fun," would triumph each time Carolyn decided to venture out into the wild. A blend of humor and subtle defiance was to be my weapon of choice, anything to make her see the folly of her stubborn pursuits. As night began to settle in, the glow of string lights twinkling above became a metaphor for our newfound unity. All around me were smiling faces, parking chairs nestled cleverly to create spontaneous gathering spots, and happy children scurrying around engaging in impromptu games. However, it felt incomplete without a closing sentiment, some grand finale for Carolyn, before she finally exploded in her extraordinary blend of bitterness and shocked disbelief. "We should have a final toast to celebrate the end of Carolyn's rule," I declared dramatically, drawing the crowd's attention as if I were about to disclose a top-secret mission. "To the future of community spirit!" Everyone erupted into cheers, feeling the heat of uncontainable laughter, while I could only imagine Carolyn longing to trespass her own rules. The war against camaraderie would culminate in endless hilarity. As I raised my glass, glancing toward Carolyn's fortress, whose lights flickered from inside as if realizing her ruse was floundering, I felt an overwhelming sense of triumph. Here stood the vastness of community, buffered against one stern voice. One woman's assembled grievance crashing against this fortification of fun. Would she rally forth like a warrior with speeches and decrees? I imagined a battle cry ringing through the air as she stormed out, making the final display as magnificent as a military procession. Still, deep down, I sensed she wouldn't. She was too horrified to acknowledge the absurdity of her bitter crusade. The celebratory spirit had taken root, and in that moment, I couldn't wait to witness the climactic end of this comical war. What other surprises lay ahead for us as we charged forward? Thanks for tuning in. It really means a lot to us. If you're still fired up from this HOA showdown, check out our next jaw-dropping battle on the right, or let YouTube surprise you with another wild ride on the left. Take your pick, and I'll see you in the next neighborhood drama.